Well, hello. This is Dr. Michael Bogart, and I want to welcome you back to our video series, Exploring World Religions. In session 15, we've been looking at Protestantism. Now, in clip 1, we looked at the historical setting, which brought on this whole wave of protest. In clip 2, we considered Lutheranism and the Anabaptists. In this final video clip of session 15, we'll take a quick look at the Reformed churches and Anglicanism. So, in looking at the Reformed churches, we must begin with a person named Jean Calvin. We know him now as John Calvin. Born in 1509 in Picardy, France, Calvin was educated in law at the University of Paris. He was personally converted to faith in Jesus and the Protestant cause through personal study of the Bible while at the university in 1532. As a declared Protestant in a time when breakaway groups were the focus of social unrest across Europe, Calvin was forced to flee Paris. Escaping south through Geneva, the main city in the French-speaking region of Switzerland, he was persuaded by William Farel of Geneva to stay and teach there. And apart from several years when he was banished from the city, Calvin would remain in Geneva the rest of his life. Now, Calvin's objective was far more ambitious than the goals of either Luther, who pretty much left government up to the princes, or of the Anabaptists, who never had much control over government at all. Calvin wanted not only to reform the church, but to establish a Christian commonwealth, a Christian society as well. His vision was a pure and biblical church and a society where all laws and customs were based on the Bible. Calvin oversaw the formation of a representative democracy in both church and civil government. Calvin's Geneva has served as a model for representative governments in the United States and other countries since that time. As far as the church side goes, Calvinism and the Reformed churches that he founded had the reputation of being very stern and no-nonsense. Yet in an age of social upheaval, when other groups were executing dissenters, Geneva was actually a fairly stable haven for many people. In a way, it's surprising how little violence was used in this movement. As Calvin's reputation grew, Geneva became a center for training, and young men came there to be taught and to observe what was happening. After their time in Geneva, these young Reformed leaders went home to start Reformed churches in Germany, the Netherlands, Scotland, and France. For instance, in the Netherlands, Calvin's movement became the Dutch Reformed Church. But in Scotland, his student John Knox founded the Presbyterian Church. Although the Netherlands, Scotland, and parts of Germany largely embraced the Reformed movement, in France things were very different. There had been Protestant-like dissent from the Catholic Church in France way before the Reformation, back in the Middle Ages. The most notable group among these dissenters was known as the Waldensians. They were founded by Peter Waldo in the 1200s. The Waldenses were persecuted all over southern France and northern Italy and were finally suppressed in the mid-1500s. But the Reformed movement in France fared a bit better, for a while at least. Members of the French Reformed Church were commonly called Huguenots. We think it sounds like Huguenots in English, but it's Huguenot. They were assembled from the remnants of the Waldensians and other dissenters, and they were linked to John Calvin's Geneva through one of his students, Guillaume Farel, or William Farel. The Huguenots were convinced that the Catholic Church was a completely corrupt institution, that it did not represent Jesus in any way, and that it needed to be completely replaced by a church that was true to the Bible. They also wanted a reformed government that worked with this reestablished Christianity to transform society. Reformed strongholds were mainly in the west and south of France, especially among certain noble families and among city dwellers in places like La Rochelle, Montpellier, and Nîmes. Estimates are that perhaps 10% of the population of France became Protestant through most of the mid-1500s. And the fortunes of Reformed Protestants in France ebbed and flowed with riots and even armed military clashes between Protestant and Catholic forces. But those fortunes took a sharp decline, beginning with the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, when thousands of Huguenots were killed by the Catholic troops. Over the decades that followed, many Huguenots fled to the Netherlands, where a strong Reformed church had already taken hold, as well as to many other countries, including Dutch and English colonies in North America and South Africa. And by the way, the term Huguenot may actually come from the Dutch term huisgenoten, meaning housemates. In other words, fellow members of the Reformed household. Huisgenoten was transformed into the French Huguenot. So much for Protestantism in France. Now, overall, the Reformed churches are less liturgical than Lutheranism, and they made a cleaner break with the Roman Catholic Church. Reformed Protestantism holds to many of the same beliefs as other Protestants, such as the authority of the Bible alone, salvation by faith in Jesus alone, and the priesthood of believers. But what stood out for Reformed Protestantism was the overall stress on the sovereignty or kingship of God. God is king, and ultimately, he cannot be suppressed or resisted. And this was important in a time when the whole idea of earthly kings and monarchs was being questioned all over Europe. God is king, regardless of who sits on an earthly throne. That was the Reformed idea. And it may be a great reminder for people in the 21st century as well. Now we move on to Anglicanism. For much of their history, the English had maintained a sort of detached loyalty to Rome. More than a century before Luther, John Wycliffe had raised questions about the authority of the papacy and even made the first complete English translation of the Bible. So the stage was set for a break. Yet oddly, when it came, it was far more political than theological. The break started with King Henry VIII's desire to divorce his wife, Queen Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of the famous Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs of Spain. Now, Henry was no reformer. In fact, he strongly spoke out against Martin Luther and other Protestant groups. Henry's reason for splitting from the Roman Catholic Church was far more personal. His wife, Catherine, the daughter of these Catholic majesties, could not produce a male heir to the throne, which he desperately wanted. Henry politely asked the Pope for a divorce, which was refused. So, Henry, not being used to being told no for anything, renounced the Pope's authority and pressured Parliament to pass the Act of Supremacy in 1534. This made Henry supreme over the Church of England and the Archbishop of Canterbury as its spiritual head. Henry was then able to divorce Catherine and went on to marry 5 other women, not all of them at the same time. But Henry had no desire to change much in terms of what the English Church taught. Henry's Anglican Church was still very Catholic in outlook, just without the Pope. He conveniently confiscated church lands in England and passed them out to his nobles to keep them committed to his Protestant split with Rome. Henry died in 1547, though he had 2 daughters, Mary from Catherine and Elizabeth from his second wife, Anne Boleyn. But his heir was a son, Edward, from his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour. So Edward became king at age 9. He really wasn't in any position to make decisions about either his realm or the church. But Edward's advisors were strongly Protestant, more or less with Calvin's Reform movement. They pushed English Catholics out of key positions and made the English church much more thoroughly Protestant. Then Edward died in 1553 at the age of 17 and was succeeded by his half-sister Mary. Remember, Mary was Catherine's daughter and very Catholic. She reversed the direction of the English church and was determined to drag it back into the Catholic fold. Now it was the reformers who were harassed, and some of them, unfortunately, were burned at the stake. Then Mary died in 1558 after only 5 years on the throne, and her harsh persecution of Protestants earned her the nickname Bloody Mary. Think of that next time you order one before dinner. The only close relative left now was another half-sister, Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter. Elizabeth had seen the religious turmoil under her father, brother, and sister, so she chose a middle course. The Church of England would remain Protestant in terms of church government and doctrine, mostly. Its literature would retain some similarities with Catholicism, so the rituals would seem kind of similar. Catholics and more extreme Protestants would be discouraged but not persecuted, so there was some room for dissent. The main distinctive of the English or Anglican Church is moderate reform. Services are in English and priests can be married. Anglicanism has been perhaps the most prolific of the Reformation branches in terms of spin-off groups. This is because Anglicanism was relatively more lenient towards dissenters. The dissenter groups took a couple forms. The group known as Puritans attempted and for a while succeeded in staying within the English church to purify it and to conform it to New Testament teachings, at least according to their own understanding, hence the name Puritan. The Puritan attempt failed, and ultimately they were pushed out and formed new churches under the Congregationalist banner. Many of these Puritans had lost hope for English society as a whole, and they migrated en masse in the 1630s to set up new churches and a new England in North America. Now, the other dissenting group was known as Separatists. These people separated voluntarily from the English church, and some settled temporarily in the more open Netherlands, where they came in contact with the Anabaptists. The main thing these separatists gained from their Anabaptist neighbors was the conviction that only true believers should be baptized. One of these who was convinced was John Smith, who founded the first Baptist church in Amsterdam in 1609. Later, an associate of his, Thomas Helwys, returned to England and established other Baptist churches there. Other spin-offs from Anglicanism were the Quakers, founded by George Fox around 1650, and the Methodists, who split from Anglicanism under the leadership of John and Charles Wesley around 1740. Now, before we finish clip 3, we need to find out what the Catholics were doing about all these defections and new groups. And the answer is that there was a Catholic counter-reformation. At the Council of Trent, which began in 1545, Protestant ideas were examined and thoroughly rejected. A former Basque soldier of Spain, Ignatius Loyola, took it upon himself to form the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, and the Jesuits were dedicated to winning people back to the Catholic faith, and to some extent they succeeded, especially in France. The controversial Jesuits also engaged in activities in the New World, India, Japan, and China, as well as founding quite a few colleges and universities. So to sum up what we've learned, Protestants gave the world some new answers to traditional questions. For instance, where does religious authority come from? Where do Christians get their basic truths? Well, the Protestant answer was and is sola scriptura. The Bible alone is the supreme authority in all matters of doctrine and practice. Compare this with the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox view that the Bible is one source of truth, along with church traditions. Another question was, how is a person saved? How does someone get the benefits of what Jesus did on the cross? The Protestant answer is sola fide. That is, faith in Christ alone is sufficient to gain the full grace of God in a person's life. Compare this with the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox view that faith appropriates God's grace, but it's mediated by the church through the sacraments. Another question is, what is the church and who is part of it? The Protestant answer is that the church is made up of all true Christians and that all believers are priests in the sense that they have direct access to God. Compare this with the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox view that the church is laity and clergy, but that access to God really is mediated by clergy. And finally, what is the essence of true Christian living? The Protestant answer is that any useful vocation, if it's done for the glory of God, is an authentic Christian life. Compare this with the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox view that true Christian living is probably best achieved in holy orders, priests, monks, and nuns. Okay, that's it for clip 3 in video session 15 within the Exploring World Religions series. I hope this overview of Protestantism was enlightening. In the next session, we'll be exploring the world of what I call alternative Christianities, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others. Till then, this is Dr. Michael Bogart. See you next time.